Hello everybody, how's it going? Good. Oh, you're so energetic. That's amazing. So, we're here to talk about wearable technology. Raise your hands if you're wearing a piece of wearable technology today. Oh, so there's about like 10, 15 people. Out of the 15 people, raise your hand if you have more than one. More than one piece of wearables. Oh, great. We're going to talk later. So, from how we work to how we play and everything in between, wearable technology, like the ways of computing before it, is going to change every facet of our lives. And one of the major ways that wearables will change our lives is in how we see ourselves, how we take care of ourselves, and how we take care of each other. So as the large slide behind me says, I'm going to talk to you a bit today about wearable well-being. So we have 45 minutes. Talking about wearable technology is a really big umbrella. So I realized fully that wearables are changing the role of the doctor, the surgeon, the sports scientist, the trainer, the nurse, the first responder. Basically any profession is starting to dabble with the use of wearables as a tool to advance the role. So I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on how consumers are adopting wearable technology to better take care of themselves. And the reason why I want to start there is because although there are pockets of pilots happening with smart glasses and smartwatches and virtual reality headsets, really where a lot of the attention, a lot of the adoption is happening is on the consumer side. And as medical professionals, medical practitioners, you're going to get a lot of pressure from the consumer on figuring out how to utilize wearable technology in your practice. So this is great to know in order to prepare for that. I'm going to leave some time at the end though so that we can have a conversation about the rest of the stuff that I may not have covered. So definitely make sure that if you want to talk about how doctors are changing what they're doing because of Google Glass, I'm here. Let's chat about that at the end. Okay, so I want to start with another question to the crowd. Raise your hand. This might be a little bit skewed because we're at Ask for Help. So I did this at another conference. They didn't do so well, but raise your hand if you know what your resting heart rate should be. Okay, so about a third. Raise your hand if you know the name of the operating system on your smartphone. Yeah, almost everything. Okay, so it's about the same. No, that's okay. So we know more about the machines that we use on a regular basis, our smartphones, our computers, our televisions, than we do, arguably, about the most important machine of all, which is your body. And I'm with you, okay? So I received my very first heart rate monitor about a year and a half ago as part of a smartwatch. I think actually it was part of an Android Wear watch. And it told me that my heart rate was 74 beats per minute, and I had no clue what that meant. I had no context. So I went to the internet said as long as I was within 60 to 100, I was fine. That still doesn't really make sense to me. But this is the case. The situation is that we are not very present anymore. We do not have a lot of body consciousness. We don't think about ourselves as biometric physiology, as a biological person that's walking about every day. And the reason is because we're really busy. And a lot of that business, ironically, has to do with the digital world that we're trying to interact with on Twitter or Facebook or our email or text messaging. And so it's brought us away from being present in the moment, and part of being present in the moment is having awareness about our body. And this is something that wearable technology is changing. So part of this lack of body awareness, what it does is it actually creates an imbalance with the doctor-patient relationship. So right now what happens with your doctor's appointment is that you go in with basically no information about what's happening with your body. You work on gut, you work on feeling, and you're trying to convey all this to your doctor, who then has to make assumptions based on gut and feeling, and then finally use data and science to do specific tests that are maybe perhaps a little bit too late because they are as a result of seeing some symptoms. When we go into those conversations, there's an imbalance in that conversation with our doctor. It's usually one-sided. And because of the lack of tools that we do not have that provide us with this information, we have shirked responsibility for ourselves, for our health. We say that it's the doctor, the healthcare, the government's responsibility to take care of us because we don't know, because ignorance is bliss, basically, because we don't have that information. Sure, we have access to perhaps buy medical equipment, but it's very pricey. It's not consumer ready. And again, this is something that wearable technology is changing. Wearables are starting to even out the scales of the relationship between the doctor and the patient, or the healthcare practitioner needs to be doctor and the patient, simply by providing them with the information that they need to better know themselves. Do we still need doctors? Yes, wholeheartedly we do. They are going to continue to be the scientists, the data analysts. In fact, they're going to be more empowered with wearable technology because eventually they will have access to information persistently and consistently over a wider time frame, which means that they'll be able to better predict and prescribe what we need from a health perspective. So why wearable technology? What has changed with wearable technology? Why were we not able to do this with the smartphone? I get this question all the time with wearable technology. Is wearable technology a fad? So wearable technology is not a fad. Wearable technology is definitely the next wave of computing, just after the smartphone, just after the computer itself. The reason why wearables have the opportunity to disrupt healthcare, to disrupt how we take care of ourselves is really because of its name. It's because it's wearable. It's because it's on our body. Arguably, we have a very intimate computer with us all the time, which is our smartphone. But if you're like me, you're trying to carry that smartphone in your cloth as many hours as possible when you're walking around the streets or going in between meetings. But at some point, you need to put the smartphone down. And it's these gaps, it's this separation between us and that technology that doesn't allow for that technology to really know us on a 24/7 consistent and persistent basis. So by wearing our technology, by putting it on ourselves, by actually having it so that it never gets put down, it gives it the access it needs to gather the information on a 24/7 basis. But the main reason why wearables are really able to do what they can do in healthcare and with our personal well-being is because of the sensors that are equipped with these devices. So proximity is key because the sensors require proximity. But with that proximity comes sensors that are beyond the sensors that we traditionally saw within computing. So right now, you have a sensor with you outside of the guys that have all these wearables, which may have more sensors. But all of you have a smartphone. That smartphone has a gyroscope and has an accelerometer, which are motion sensors. It also has the ability to understand your voice, and the camera can also be construed as some sort of sensing capability. So you do have sensors with you. Sensors are with you, and if you saw Samsung roll out their latest Galaxy device, you saw that using your finger and putting it on the back of the device in order to read your heart rate. So your smartphone can do this. It does have sensors, but it doesn't have the proximity, right? The form factor is not right. But there are other sensors that your smartphone probably won't have. We're going to get into those. But sensors that need to read your heart on a regular basis don't make sense on a smartphone. Also, sensors that are looking at your sweat don't really make sense on a smartphone. All these sensors that need persistent access to your body are probably not going to be making it onto your smartphone, but they will be making it into wearable technology. So proximity and sensors are two of the main ingredients when it comes to the success of wearables in disrupting healthcare and our personal well-being. But beyond that, behind that I should say, is really data. So the Internet of Things, which is this overarching trend that's happening here in our life, which is really pouring out of the digital world into the physical world, is all about the collection of data. So just like a quick little history on what's been happening and a recap, because we've all been part of it. We are leading what's called the information age. In the information age, we created a collective knowledge base that is the internet. And it was us trying to replicate and create basically a digital world. But there was a lot of manual involvement in creating that digital world. We created databases, we created websites. So we actually took information and put it into the internet. And then beyond that, we needed to actively participate in the online behavior to continue to provide it with information. So information about the world right now only gets to the internet for the most part if we tell it that something's happening. This is what's changing. This is the big shift. The big shift is that we're moving into what I like to call not yet the age of intelligence, which we'll talk about in a second, but the age of awareness. We're starting to wake up things, which is why we call it the Internet of Things, in order for them to sense what's going on and passively collect information to send to that digital world, which then can then be analyzed, measured, monitored, and reflected back to us. And wearable technology is a subset of the Internet of Things. So just like the Internet of Things, you may have started to buy a smart thermostat like Nest, is probably the most popular, or a smart light bulb from Home Depot. These are examples of connecting your world around you. Wearable technology is connecting your body. Okay? And so if we want to create the network of the Internet of Things, we need to connect ourselves. We need to be a node in that network, and that's what wearable technology also does. But behind all of this is data. And that's really what technology is all about, ones and zeros, right? So it shouldn't be a surprise. So wearable technology through sensors, through proximity, are gathering data in order for us to use that to better ourselves. Okay, so finally let's talk about what I'm supposed to be talking about. I have broken down wearable well-being, meaning how wearables are impacting our personal well-being, into 3 phases. These are stages that I see us moving in. They're not necessarily concurrent stages, but this is what I see from analyzing the space for the past 3.5 years. Right now, we're in what's called the quantified self stage, or the quantified self movement. You might have heard of this. So I'm going to talk a lot about where we are today, which is, again, going back to the data. It's about the collection of the data and seeing the data. This is the quantified self. But as we get more advanced, as we exit the age of awareness and move into the intelligent age, the age of intelligence, where you may have heard of artificial intelligence and contextual computing. This is all on the horizon. When our machines get smarter, we will start to move more into the diagnose self and the healing self. And so I'm going to talk about the last 2 for sure, because they're really exciting, but I'm going to spend a lot of time on the quantified self. Because this is what's happening now, and so you really need to ramp up on what's happening with quantified selfers. How many people would consider themselves a quantified selfer? Couple, okay. Maybe the same as the wearable was, in terms of numbers, but a handful. So the quantified self movement isn't necessarily tied to wearable technology, but it's become synonymous with it. So quantified selfers are usually individuals who love to document themselves in terms of data on a regular, usually everyday basis. So you can do this by just having Excel and a piece of paper. You really don't need technology to do this. Well, you can just take your heart rate and take that every 15 minutes. It can be considered a quantified self or count your steps manually. But all of this work, it's too much, right? The average person is not going to dedicate all this time to better understand how many steps they've taken, what their heart rate is every 10 minutes, how many breaths they did in and out. And so this is where wearable technology is facilitating the quantified self movement by making it easier, by taking us out of the equation as an active participant and making the collection of this data much more passive through the use of proximity and sensors and data collection. So the fact of the matter is that wearable devices that collect information on our activity, our heart rate, on our biometrics aren't new. In fact, Garmin had one of its very first heart rate monitors in 1982, and in the early 2000s, Polar had their very first heart rate monitor in 1982, and Garmin in the early 2000s came came out with their first running watch. So hardcore marathoners, triathletes, cyclists, really amateur athletes, pro athletes, these are the guys that have been utilizing wearable technology actually for quite a bit, even before we called it wearable technology. But it wasn't really until 2012 and 2013 when Nike came out with their Fuel Band, Fitbit came out with their One and their Flex, that the consumer space started to become part of this overall movement. That the consumers started to purchase devices that then tracked their activity. And this is really where the shift occurred. This is really when wearables started to proliferate. So the fact is that fitness bands, fitness trackers like Jawbone, Misfit, Nike Fuel Band, all of these devices that you've probably heard, these brands that are now starting to become household brand names, these guys make up the majority share, they have made up the majority share of the wearable space so far. So you can see this is a chart from Business Insider. So looking at 2012, 2013, 2014, that blue line there is specific fitness bands and activity trackers. So they still make up quite the majority share of wearable technology. But according to Business Insider, there's one new form factor that's coming in that will start to eat that market share up, and that's the smartwatch. So according to this chart, Business Insider expects that the fitness wearable market will go from 36% this year down to 20% in 5 years. So it's still going to be around, and these are dedicated devices, but these devices are starting to be eaten up by smartwatches. So does this mean that health and fitness is no longer a priority? No, it's not. Activity and activity tracking, which is what we're currently seeing, is still very much a dominant feature. It just means that all of these sensors that we're finding in dedicated, standalone, basic smart bands are now existing in smartwatches, like the Apple Watch, Android Wear, Samsung watches. They too have an accelerometer, which is what tracks the movement, and usually now a heart rate monitor, which have become the very two common sensors that you can find in wearable technology today, consumer-grade wearable technology. So apart from fitness devices being most common, the STEP has become kind of like the go-to metric for wearable technology. And I would say that 2013 and 2014 was definitely the year of the STEP. And I was very much the person that said, you know, why do we care about steps? Are steps really important? Are they really going to help us be better at our health? Are they going to help us improve? And I'm going to show you some stats from, or tell you some stats from a survey that the Consumer Electronics Association did around steps that say yes they do. But the step is not going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, the use of the accelerometer, which is that sensor that measures steps, is being used in a variety of different ways. So right now I'm wearing a little guide inside my belt buckle, or a belt here called Spire. It uses the accelerometer to measure the ins and outs of my breath in order to deduce my mental state of mind, my anxious and my calm and my focus. So that's using the accelerometer. It's the same sensor that measures how many steps you're taking with a Fitbit. The Apple Watch uses the accelerometer to better understand if you're standing up or not standing up and send you reminders based on that. I've also seen the accelerometer be used to measure bicep curls and other exercises. So the use of the accelerometer is one sensor that we've heard a lot about, and mainly because it's been associated with steps, but I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. But that being said, we are starting to see new sensors be utilized, like the heart rate monitor, which is the next one coming out of the gate. So you may have heard this study by the University of Pennsylvania that said that smartphone is actually more effective at measuring activity than your wearable. So this study was only 14 people, so it wasn't a lot of people, it got a lot of media attention. Wired actually did their own study, and they found that this was not, in fact, true. But what I want you to take away from this is not the accuracy of the step in regards to whether a smartphone does it better than a wearable, but the fact that it does not make sense to count your steps with a smartphone, mainly because of what I told you before. The smartphone form factor is not conducive to measuring your activity 24/7. So you may sleep with your smartphone in bed, not everyone does, but a jawbone bracelet that you can wear in the shower that you put on and you just forget about it is able to measure your activity from when you wake up to when you go to bed. And that's not something that you typically would do with a smartphone. So again, it's about the form factor, and that's a big thing to underline with wearable technology. But I told you that we're moving beyond the step. I have a stopwatch on here. I'm checking the time because I want to go. We are moving beyond the step. So there's a lot of sensors out there that are starting to be utilized. So these are the guys that we want to take note. So heart rate and breathing is definitely the next type of sensors that we're going to be seeing. On the Apple Watch, it's probably one of the most beautiful heart rate monitors, an optical light sensor that I've ever seen. Optical light sensors are definitely being utilized on an ongoing basis with smartwatches. But there are smart shirts from Montreal, Home Signal and Exoskin that have heart rate sensors and respiratory sensors built right into the shirt. And I definitely see smart shirts, especially on the sports side, being utilized on an ongoing basis quite soon once the price point comes down on these guys. Now here, it makes sense to track breathing. On my wrist, perhaps not so much, and that's because with these shirts, they have access to the torso. So again, the form factor and the position of the body really plays into this. EMG, or electromyography, is another sensor that we're starting to see with wearable technology, again in clothing. So you're going to see a common pattern here. As we move away from accessories that are wrist-based, we have the ability to get into much more advanced sensors. So EMG sensors like this one here is smart shorts from Ethos in California. They have sensors that are built into their shorts. They also have heart rate and respiratory, but the EMG sensor actually measures your muscle effort in order for you to better understand if you're overusing your glute on the right versus the left when you're working out, or any other way that you'd like to use it. Pressure sensors and Sensoria smart socks are another type of sensors that we're seeing in, again, smart clothing. All three of these smart clothes that I talked about are actually on the market today. But again, the price point is a little bit high in terms of people buying it, and you want to buy more than one, obviously, because it is clothing. But these pressure sensors allow you to understand, especially from a running perspective, where you're landing, where your footing is. Are you placing your pressure more on your heel or on the front of your foot? And all this information, like all the rest of the wearables that I've been talking about so far, gather this data, again, in that quantified self phase, and send it through to a smartphone app in order for you to visualize. EEG, so we got Interact on here today. Anybody go to that session? So those guys are amazing. They're here in Toronto. They have a brain sensing headband, so the ability to gather brainwave data and utilize that in many different ways. Right now, Muse uses the brainwave data in order to discern if you're calm or not calm, and then walk you through some meditative exercise in order to get you to a calm state of mind. And one sensor that I'm really interested in that we're seeing is a lot of these talk about more how your body is doing from a physiology perspective. The Gsr sensor, which is actually the same sensor in a lie detector test, the galvanic skin response sensor measures your sweat to produce an arousal state, which can then infer your emotional state. So we're starting then to take a look at your emotions. So you saw brainwaves with Muse, you saw heart rate, breathing, electromyography. Now we're getting into emotions. So you can start to see how if we started to connect all these dots, we're really going to be able to better understand ourselves, not just from a physical standpoint, but mental and emotional as well. And this is an example of a ring here called Mood Metric, which is going to be on the market next year, that has a galvanic skin response underneath it, and it actually is gathering information about how stressed you are based on your emotional state, and then will vibrate to let you know, hey, you're stressed out, here's a breathing exercise or some sort of mental exercise to get that number down. That's what this number means, is actually a measurement, and that's actually kind of middle of the road, so you're doing pretty okay. Lastly, maybe a little bit out of sorts, because I could have put this in with more of the biometrics, but temperature is obviously another one that we're seeing. I'm noticing temperature being used a lot in baby wearables, which is another huge segment. Baby wearables meaning booties or onesies that your baby wears, and then you're able to measure their movement, their heart rate, their position, which is key, as well as their temperature. But again, all present that information back to the user. Again, that quantified self movement. So here are some stats again. So you saw the market shrink for fitness bands. That market share is going to be made up through smart garments, is what Gartner says here. So we may be losing traction on dedicated fitness bands because all those sensors are being folded into smartwatches, but we are definitely seeing fitness device shipments gain back some of that market share that the fitness bands had through smart garments. And Gartner's very aggressive here with their forecast that 26 million smart garments are expected to ship worldwide. I think that's a little bit bullish, but we're definitely seeing smart clothing be one of the categories that is taking hold within the consumer space. So in the quantified self movement, it's all about data. I kind of prefaced this part of the talk by saying, I wasn't convinced that steps can really make a difference. When I dug a little bit deeper, and by steps I mean kind of using it, generically by saying, you're giving me information, and I look at the information, so what? This is kind of what's happening right now. So as a user, I am wearing an Apple Watch, or I'm wearing Spire, I get all this information gathered, and then I go into the application, and then it's presented to me. So how is this helpful? So I'm going to walk you through a couple reasons why, just in the quantified self stage, which is just in the infancy of how we are using wearables to teach us about our body and making us more healthier people, they're making a difference. And the first is just in terms of data visualization and the connection of data visualization to body awareness. So you remember I talked about, and we did that little poll in the beginning where you didn't know your heart rate? Well, with wearables, you're going to know your heart rate. You're going to know your resting heart rate. You're going to know how many times you breathe. Your Apple Watch annoyingly tells you that you do not stand enough throughout the day. So even though it's not diagnosing anything, even though it's not really telling you to do anything more than just move because you're not moving, just the fact that all these devices are gathering data and then putting that data up to you as a mirror to reflect really what you did that day really is a very visceral and impactful way to make you understand who you are from a biometric standpoint. And if you are a proactive individual, which is kind of the key here, it'll help you make changes and decisions to be a more healthier person. So even just in the fact that when I go to the application, or it doesn't need to be an application, it could be online, I see this data. When you see that you have not taken any steps out of the 10,000 that day, or that you've only stood up twice out of the 8 hours that you're supposed to stand up, it gets under your skin. So, there's not a lot of data around that. Outside of the Consumer Electronics Association survey I mentioned, which found that 83% of those that use fitness devices indicated that they had an increased awareness about their health, and that by having an increased awareness about their health, they felt empowered to do something. Right? So it is very powerful just to have that mirror held up to you. But that's not very active, right? There's a lot to be asked from the consumer. So what these applications are also doing is that they're building in a reward system as part of a motivation by quantifying it for the most part. How many of you, well, I don't know how many of you put your hand up, but how many of you put your hand up have a Fitbit? One. So do you really try to get your steps? Kind of. Who really tries to get their steps? Anybody here? Okay, the co-organizer of Wearables, she is a fanatic about her steps. She will walk much. I will say, are you doing trains at home? She said, no, I'm walking because I have to make myself full. Fitbit users are fanatic users, oftentimes. Sorry, sir. So it's because they built in a reward system, and they've also done another thing which I'll talk about in a second. But this feeling of accomplishment by getting your 10,000 steps, this little bang on your wrist on the Apple Watch when you've hit all your goals, is a more proactive way to edge people into having a healthier life. And this is taking it one step further, where they no longer have to go into the application in order to see the data. The data is coming to them via push notification, via emails. I mean, like Fitbit here, and all of them really send you an email if you're subscribed to let you know, hey, you haven't used your Fitbit in a while. I wasn't using my Luminal Lift for a week, and I got emails from Luminal Lift saying, we miss you, like, how's your posture? You must be like a hunchback by now. So, these little reminders years, this more proactive relationship between me and my wearable is really helping to coach me and guide me into the right direction, which is to take better care of my body. But the other factor that I want to talk about with Fitbit is this idea of having some healthy competition. So the gamification of wearable applications is really key. And Nike did a really great job with their Nike community. I knew a lot of people who were using the Nike Field Band that were really motivated by trying to beat out other people in their network. So just like rewards, which is much more of a personal tactic, the competition in the gamified system by trying to get more steps than your peers or trying to stand up more times than your coworkers is something that can also drive a person to have more healthier habits. And I talked a little bit about this in emails, but outside of emails, the wearables themselves are starting to build in haptic and visual cues. So haptic means like vibrations. So you usually use haptics right now on your smartphone, you put it on the vibration mode. A lot of these wearables have vibration technology in them. And so having a little nudge, it literally feels like a nudge, to remind you to stand up straight, to remind you to stand up, to remind you to get moving, is another tactic that these wearables are using in order to propel you to have a much healthier lifestyle. And this little guy here that you see at the top left is this little wearable that I have here that's orange. It's called the Lumo Lift. And this guy here is watching my posture, my shoulder posture, and it's going to vibrate when I'm slouching to remind me to put my shoulders back. So this is a great example of utilizing haptic feedback to remind me to be healthier, to remind me to hold myself high. And it's going to really impact, you guys all stood up like kind of straight, which is nice, so I'm going to make a little Lumo Lift today for you. But it's going to help me with my upper back and my posture overall. So coaching, gamified, rewards, this is all what's happening right now within the quantified self-movement. So yes, this data is being collected. Yes, we could be doing much more with this data, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But even just having this data, holding it up to us, and utilizing it in a reward, gamification, reminder type way, it's coaching people, it's changing people, and it's changing the conversation about health. It's changing the conversation about health with them, and it's going to change the conversation about health with you as medical practitioners if you're in the audience. Because they're going to come to you with all this data, even though it may just be steps or heart rate or posture, and they're going to ask you to do something about it. Because they now have this information and they're using it to better their lives. And some of them are finding that it is bettering their lives. In fact, if I go back to this slide here, according to that same CEA study, 9 in 10 wearable fitness activity owners agree that devices that prompt them actually made them have a much more active lifestyle, and that resulted in them working out vigorously 3 or more times a week. 63% of them, work out more vigorously 3 times a week versus the standard average of 32%. So there have been studies that have been done to put a little bit more rigor around the effectiveness of just having sensors that provide you with data. But where are we going here? So I mentioned before that there's 2 other phases that I see coming down the chute with wearable technology. So there will always be wearables, and they may be one and the same at this point, that collect data and then utilize that data in some way. But right now we're not seeing this data be utilized any more than just collecting it and then presenting it back. And sometimes in some applications they provide you with small recommendations. But they don't go as far as prescribing things or diagnosing things. That has a lot to do with regulatory approval. There's a lot of legal issues around that. There's a lot of privacy and security concerns around that. But also, the sensors are also not 100% accurate as they need to be. We're going to talk maybe list these out in just a second. But I definitely see a new wave of wearables coming out over the course of the next few years that will start to actually connect those dots for you as an individual and will start to diagnose you. And this is when I think things really get real and wearables become less of a nice to have, which they are sitting in that bucket right now, and more of a must have. So one of the rumors about the Apple Watch before it came out is that it was going to have 10 sensors, and that it's going to tell you that you are going to have a heart attack a week before you have a heart attack. So it sounds a little bit untrue, but there are a lot of devices out there that are starting to be able to do this, or at least striving to do this. Devices that are utilizing the data that is being collected by these sensors and then collecting that data and analyzing it so that they can predict disease, so that they can predict symptoms of a heart attack or precursors to diabetes. The picture here that we have is an active Google X project, which is a contact lens that is meant to be used by diabetes, people living with diabetes, and it measures their glucose levels using their tiers and then tells them whether or not they have to take an action. Okay, so this is an example of a wearable that takes it one step further, that's actually diagnosing and prescribing something to you so that you need to take action, and it's more from a medical perspective. So we're going to see more wearables come out, and they're not just wearables. There are also devices like Scanadu Scout and the Scanadu organization that are creating devices that allow you to simply point it to your head to take temperature, or you pee on a stick or pee in a smart toilet, for example, and then all of that data is collected, and then it outputs whether or not you have a disease or a precursor to cancer, or if you have AIDS or any of these types of outcomes. So this future that I'm talking about is a very near future, and I'm going to tell you why we're not there yet, because there's a lot of stuff that still needs to happen. But the reason why I wanted to kind of whet your appetite with that is because it can get a little confusing why we should care about wearable technology when it's all about steps and counting and the collection of data. Although I showed you why it's still impactful, you have to understand that we're just building a foundation to get to that next step, where we're going to be able to use this data in that age of intelligence to be able to analyze it, and then once regulatory approval is in place, when sensors are more robust and more accurate, once the technology is there, we are going to be able to diagnose ourselves with this type of technology and work with the medical community to figure out what that means. But beyond this, beyond the diagnosed self, I wanted to talk about what I call the healing self. And again, this is not necessarily confirmed, because already we're starting to see wearables that are actually attempting to heal. So these are wearables that are not necessarily gathering information about you, but are actually meant to change an outcome, that are actually meant to change you. So probably the best example that I've come across so far is from a wearable called Think, that basically uses electroshock therapy to change your mind. And so it was actually quite enjoyable when I tried it in Vegas. But you put it on your head and you choose which zap you want. I forget what they called it. It didn't say zap, but I'm going to call it zap. So you choose whether you wanted to be more calm or be more energetic. So this wearable was not monitoring if I was calm or energetic. That's more like a muse inspires. This wearable was actually promising to make me more calm or more energetic. And it used that through electrostimulus, which I did over the course of, I think, 12 minutes, which they have indicated have done a lot of studies about. You can look them up there, Think with a Y, THYNC. And so this wearable is an example of, I think, some wearables that we'll see coming out that won't just be gathering data, diagnosing and prescribing, but also trying to be part of the cure as well. So why are we not yet at this point where we're in this magical future where we can all be better aware of what disease we have and cure them on the spot? Will that actually happen? I'm not quite sure. I think it's going to be a long road for us to get to that point. And the reason is because of a couple of these things. And I'm going to take some questions in just a second. So I'm going to give you a rundown of some of the barriers that are stopping, or not stopping, that we have to overcome in order to get to that future. The accuracy of sensors is key, obviously, because if your sensors are not gathering your heart rate accurately, if they're not collecting your temperature, if the galvanic skin response says that you're stressed or that you're lying and you're not, and you're in a situation where that was crucial, that can really be a severe mistake. So we can't rely 100% on these devices yet, because the sensors safely say you can live and die by the heart sensor, heartbeat monitor that's on your wrist. That has a lot to do with the sensor, but it has a lot to do with the placement as well. Right? So on your wrist is maybe not the best way to gather your heart rate. Regulatory approval, the FDA has made some announcements in the States about slightly being hands-off with what's going on with wearable applications to date, mainly because they're not getting to that next point where they're prescribing things, diagnosing things. They're really staying in a safe spot where they're just collecting data and presenting that data back. But there's a lot of talk around what needs to happen on the regulatory side in order to keep up with the pace of change within, especially the wearable and Internet of Things space, where a lot of these medical type devices are starting to hit the consumers before they're hitting labs and hospitals. Health infrastructure, so we talked a lot about in the beginning about the changing relationship with the doctor. So yes, you may already be seeing your patients come in with their own Fitbit data, but to be able to realize this dream where we're collecting our emotional, mental, and physical state, and then the doctor have access to that means that there needs to be systems in place that need to be unified. There needs to be a complete profile, unified view of that patient, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done there within any health infrastructure in order for that to happen. On top of that, even if we were to go down that road, every single wearable right now, for the most part, has its own software development kit. There's a lack of standards, there's a lot of fragmentation, some are proprietary, many are not open, and so even the code itself is fighting back against that ability to realize a dream where we have doctors that are not more data analysts that can access data at any time to help us understand that, hey, I shouldn't eat that big of Doritos because if I do, I know what the consequence is. So even the code itself is right now very immature and working against that. Privacy and security is probably the #1 topic that comes up when I talk about wearable technology. I think maybe because I always do that wearing a wearable camera, which is this little guy here that takes a picture every 30 seconds. But that being aside, the collection of our biometric information is probably one of the most intimate data sets we'll ever collect. And as much as it can do good, and I talked a lot about how it can do good today, mainly because I'm a very optimistic person, it can also be used against us if it's in the wrong hands. So I'm talking about the use of biometric data to deny services, to deny access, to deny the use of your car, or to deny you having the right to see your children. A lot of this data that's being collected, if it's not accurate, if there's not laws around it, if we don't understand who owns it, how we're going to use it, all of these questions, these societal questions need to be worked out in order for us to get to those next stages. The age of intelligence is really dependent on this, actually. Okay, I think that's it. I talked a lot, so hopefully you can ask a lot of questions. Thank you so much. Questions? Hopefully you have questions. You can ask questions about what I didn't talk about, because I'm sure I had some points. Let's start here. The camera thing, okay. So this camera is called Narrative. It takes a picture every 30 seconds. Why do I wear this camera is the question I get. So I wear this camera for 2 reasons. One, I wore it as a social experiment. I was one of the early Google Glass explorers, and I found that people were very fearful of me wearing Google Glass because they thought I was recording at all times, but really the truth of the matter with Google Glass is that it's off usually. It doesn't really do anything until you get a notification. That being said, I wanted to wear this at the same time to see if people noticed this, because they were very focused on Google Glass because it was on my eyes. So a lot of people, when I went to the Starbucks, would be like, you can't wear that Google Glass. And I said, well, that one's not videotaping, this one's taking pictures. And then they'd be like, oh my gosh, and just like, blow their mind, what? I can't handle it. So I originally started wearing it as a social experiment to see, are people okay with cameras being worn all the time? And then I started to like look at it, and then I started wearing like a bow tie. So it's I have a long relationship with it. It's quite fun. But it takes a picture every 30 seconds, it stores it, and then I load it into the computer. The next version, Narrative 2, will be Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And it basically does its magic on collecting and grouping the images. It's great to go back and see what the work you've been doing. I believe that they're going to be opening up their APIs so that you can actually do some behavioral analysis on yourself. How many coffees have I drank? How many times did I see mom? How many times did I walk outside? How many times have I looked at Twitter? So this is some great ways to be able to use this type of data, image data, to be able to learn more about myself. But I have heard a lot of people starting to use these types of devices for Alzheimer's patients as well, which to me makes a lot of sense. And my aunt bought my cousin who is autistic one of these cameras as well, so that she was able to better understand what he was up to, who he interacted with throughout the day, because he's not always able to communicate that. So there's some real great benefit to it outside of just me wearing like a gold tie, which now seems very frivolous. Yes, sir.
Just what might on?
No, I think it's on. It's just really tall.
Okay.
Yes.
Thinking about your graph about the watches and how smartwatch. Just before I came here, we were talking in the lab back in Mohawk, and all the students were saying, "I don't wear a watch. I'm not going to wear a watch. I got my phone." So I'm thinking, is this everyone over the age of 25 that are swapping their watches? And we have another generation coming up that really has no interest in watches and these sort of things anymore.
Right.
I think that really makes sense, or they mostly have been grabbing data from early adopters that it makes it look like they have all this.
I think like the early curve, let me go back to that. I think the early curve is early adopters. And most of the early adopters are the older generation. This is the thing that I'm going to say about a smartwatch. We have to stop thinking it's a watch. You do not consider the phone in your pocket a phone. It's not a rotary phone that you're carrying around. We need to let go of the watch. It's just that we have this form factor that looks similar, sorry I passed it, to a watch. So the watch is a really hard sell. I'm trying to talk and find that graph at the same time. The watch is a really hard sell for people because it doesn't bring with it new features. This is a really big, hard marketing problem for Apple Watch or any watches. What it is trying to do is it's trying to correct the wrongs of your smartphone. So right now we have a lot of computing power, we have a lot of access to what our smartphone is able to provide to us. But it's a time suck. It's very inefficient. We have lost ourselves. We are addicted to our smartphones. We need to be cured of it. And wearable technology, smart watches in particular, are starting to wean us off the need to have to always hold and check our smartphones. Now, ironically, it does a lot of notifications, so I know what you're going to say. It still is buzzing on my wrist. But the point is that if you really want to use a smartwatch right, and there's a great article from Joanna Stern from Wall Street Journal, who originally said that she was going crazy with notifications until she realized she needed to take control of her life with these notifications and only get the ones that were most important. And that's really what the smartwatch is promising to do. Again, it's a hard thing to market to people. But if you live with a smartwatch for a couple of weeks, you'll start to find that you're not as dependent on your smartphone. And you'll also find that you feel more in control, even though you're not getting notifications all the time, because you don't feel like you're missing out on anything, because you're only getting the notifications you need to know at that moment. Only the things that need to bother you now bother you. The rest go into the background, and you check them on your own time. So the smartwatch is trying to make you more present, and it's trying to cure that smartphone addiction. So that all being said, that's hard to market. And that's hard to market to people who just want new features, who up until now have seen new ways of computing that brought them new features, faster, smarter, and although the smartwatch does a couple things that the smartphone cannot, there's a lot of overlap there, and that's where the hard sell is. But the younger generation, they never even wore a watch before. So I think it's a harder sell to people who have been wearing watches because they love watches than it is to someone who's never worn a watch. And then as soon as they start to see how specific killer apps are utilized on this device, they're going to adopt it because of that. So the efficiency is one of those killer applications, which I don't think is completely understood until you use it. But I think the more obvious ones are going to be payments and identity. So the ability to have their wallet under risk using biometrics. So Apple Pay is a good example of that. We don't have that here in the city, but I don't know about you, but I get very giddy and excited when I tap my card at Starbucks. It's really fast and easy, and I feel like I didn't pay for anything. So this is exactly what paying with your wrist feels like when you just raise and grab your coffee. It's like again, it's like shaving off the seconds. Another thing that's really different with the smartwatch is this use of haptic feedback in order to communicate. So right now we do not use vibrations on our smartphone outside of the fact that it's buzzing on the table or we feel a vibration in our hands. If you look at what Apple's doing with digital touch, where you can send your heartbeat, where you can send Morse code to your friend, it sounds very gimmicky, but there's a lot of companies out there in the wearable space that are really looking to use haptic feedback as furthering our nonverbal communication. And I totally believe that in the next 5 years or so, we'll start to learn a new language, which is nonverbal, it's not written, it's not visual, it's just us having something on our wrist where I know that it's mom calling and she wants to know if I'm coming home. And it sounds really magical, very Sixth Sense-like, but that is the direction that wearables are headed if we allow it to. So that's another reason why we need to have something on our wrist, or at least on our body, than if we just had a smartphone on us. Because a smartphone is not always on us, and it's not convenient for us to wear. So those are a couple reasons why I think the smartwatch will do what that graph is whenever I can find it. I do think the smartwatch will be successful over the course of the next few years. And it will be more than just early adopters. But the early adopters are the ones that kind of see what I'm talking about. Yes, sir. Let me see if I can get that. There we go.
So, in terms of, so you're saying that there's going to be like an increased number of sensors that are picking up action that can be used for health, useful information beyond just step tracking, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. They're starting to come up now, but as that increases and people start showing up with their healthcare provider, doctor, dentist, nurse, whatever it is, they're like, hey, here's all my data. What I'm curious about is what is the reaction going to be from the healthcare side to this data, right? And maybe, I don't know if that's necessarily a question for you or just for the audience, but I am very curious as to what, because, we watch shows like House, or House is like, I don't believe what anybody says, right? Like, he just is, he's like a private investigator. So what is that going to look like?
I don't think I am qualified to answer that as a non-medical practitioner or professional. So I'm not going to pretend to know that. I do know that big data in general, which is the problem that you're talking about, is a problem for every industry. It's not just going to be a problem for doctors, but it's a problem for marketers, it's a problem for product creators. And so that's where software comes in. And so if we're going to be collecting a wide set of data, then we're going to need software to sort through these things. The doctor is not going to be sitting there with the output of all this in Excel spreadsheets doing, calculations, trying to figure out what's happening for that one person. So I think that's where software is going to come in. That's where the health infrastructure needs to be considered, so that you have the necessary software to just provide the medical professional with what he needs or she needs, and you provide the individual with what they need at the same time. And that's the same thing with this narrative code. This is an example. But again, I'm going to preface that by saying we're not there yet. That's where contextual computing and artificial intelligence are necessary ingredients for all this to make sense. The Internet of Things does not work without machines helping us make sense of this data. Our minds are not equipped to be able to do that. But the narrative clip collects images every 30 seconds. Do you know how many images I have when I wear this throughout the day? It's like your medical practitioner. But the application sorts through these so that it groups them by location and time, and it also automatically removes about half of them because they were too shaky or had bad light. So this is our example of software starting to make sense of the data for me, or at least kind of greasing the wheel so I can do the rest of the work. And I think that's kind of what's going to be needed there. But I think right now is a scarier time for doctors. Because right now we don't have those tools, but we are starting to get those sensors. So then, it's kind of like WebMD on crack, right? Because now we're going to have all these sensors about ourselves. We're going to be gathering our heart rate. We're going to be noticing I have a heartburn and I never knew I had a heartburn. And we're going to be freaking out and going for a doctor. And so I think that's a scenario I see on an ongoing basis until the dust is settled and we start to have some software to help everybody. Yeah. Oh, one more question. Sorry.
I was just wondering if there's anything being done in the direction of battery life for wearables, because you talk about smartphones versus the watch.
Right.
I think a real selling point would be battery life. So are you tapping into alternate energy sources like solar, and then you don't have to worry about
yes
repowering
energy
the devices
Battery's not a wearable technology problem, it's a technology problem in general. And it's even more than that. I mean, if we're expected to have smart fridges, smart shirts, smart pantries, smart toilets, smart jars, smart, whatever, everything's going to be connected, it all needs to have energy. So energy is definitely a huge problem. I always say that instead of focusing on the next wearable, everyone should just get into a room for a year, park advancing that, and just work on battery life and come back. I don't think batteries right now are actually stopping us from adopting wearable technology. My Apple Watch lasts all the way until I get home. In fact, my Apple Watch lasts longer than my smartphone. So I think the smartphone has groomed us to know that we need to bring a cord with us and hope to God we can take it home and plug it in. Okay, so the smartphone is really the one that I want to fix. Now that being said, I have been seeing some work in energy harvesting that is starting to be utilized and utilizing wearables as energy sources. So Tommy Hilfiger has a jacket that is made of solar panels to gather the sun energy so you can plug your phone in the pocket. Sounds very like 1990s future, but it's what's going to happen. It's how are we going to harness the energy around us, wind, our sweat, our body heat I'm seeing. And also an interesting fellow, if you want to see where we're going to be going in the next 15 years, named Neil Harbison, who's the first cyborg. He's now in New York, he was in Spain before. He has an antenna that's actually implanted in the back of his head that can translate color into sound because he's colorblind. And the last time he was in Toronto, he said that he was trying to find a way to power his device using blood flow. So, I think these things seem a little bit scary right now, but eventually I think utilizing ourselves as energy cells, as well as the environment, is going to be very commonplace. And in fact, at least on the environment side, it's very underutilized and untapped. And again, I'm wearing 5 devices today, 5, and that's not going to be very much in the very near future, as everything I'm hearing is going to be connected. You're not going to go home, put this all on your dresser to charge. So we need to figure out new ways to charge, not